All right, it's Perry Marshall, Bob Rigneris. We are back. We are approaching the top of our prediction list. We are at number 4 today, and it wouldn't be Planet Perry if we didn't delve into the spiritual, at least one of these. So this prediction, Perry, is interesting to me because I think in other predictions we've talked about swings. This is another pendulum swing back to something that existed before. I'll let you set it up.
Yeah, so there's a book called Pendulum that makes a pretty reasonable case that society goes through swings that happen on an 80-year timeline. And so a very significant thing happened. It would have been impossible to predict in advance, but as a result of 9/11. So when 9/11 happened, a whole bunch of atheists used that as an opportunity to say, see everybody, religion is the problem, right? Science builds airplanes, religion flies them into buildings. Well, with certain extremists, that's certainly true, but I don't think that's generally true, but it was true enough to start a meme. And so atheism went in the 90s and the 80s. Atheism was kind of this very intellectual, beard stroking sort of abstract conversation that happened mostly below the radar. And then all of a sudden, between what happened with 9/11 and the internet, what you had was the rise of what people call the four horsemen: Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris. And man, these guys were on a crusade. And Dawkins put out a book called The God Delusion in the probably 06 or 07. And by 2010, that whole thing was in full swing, and it was on social media. And the result of this was literally every time there was a newspaper article about a religious topic, man, there's some angry atheists they're in the blog comments and they're insulting everybody and calling everybody names. And the whole nature of this movement was to just tell everybody how stupid they are for believing in fairies or whatever. And and when this was going on, I was just astonished at how shallow all of this was. Like, I mean, these guys don't even have any real arguments. Like Richard Dawkins' books were, they would flunk a freshman philosophy class. So I was just astounded, and I thought, surely this is going to burn itself out. Well, it has. Okay. In fact, the new atheism is like solidly in the rear view mirror. And there are even some people, Jerry Coyne, for example, who won't even really admit that it was even a movement in the first place, let alone that he was one of the leaders along with the rest of them. And so that really has burned itself out. Well, if you combine that with another phenomenon that's really only 2 years old, and that phenomenon is Jordan Peterson in the intellectual dark web. So what's going on with that? Well, first of all, Peterson is the kind of person who only comes along about once every 50 years. And he's really changed the whole conversation because he's having an intelligent conversation, whereas the previous guys were not. They were just being bullies and calling people names. And
Like our politicians.
Yeah, it was very political. And so what that has combined with the very other recent phenomenon, which is the age of the 2 or 3 hour interview. Okay, it's the Joe Rogan podcast where he sits down and talks to somebody for 3 hours. And so social media, if you go back 10 years, the pendulum swing of social media was like the bumper sticker slogan and the meme and the polarization, because there's no possible way that you could have an intelligent conversation with something like that. And now what has happened, the pendulum swung the other way, and now there's a serious hunger for deeper conversations. And it's not from everybody, but there's enough people who want to have those deep conversations and those nuanced conversations that they're actually happening. Well, so let's add a third element to what's going on. And the third element is that the social media and technology has left a lot of people feeling empty. Okay, it's like, all right, well, I got enough gadgets and I got enough transportation and I've got a nice enough house and I have these 250 Facebook friends and I'm still lonely. And what I'm seeing is that amongst some groups of people, especially people in the age 20 to 30, is there's a resurgence of interest in the ancient stories. There's a resurgence of interest in ancient literature. There's a resurgence of interest in liturgy and tradition and ritual. And it is completely the opposite of what you would normally associate with modern world in modern technology. In Planet Perry, Renaissance time is actually quite popular. There's a lot of people in Planet Perry. They literally do start their day with, a notebook and a pen and a cup of coffee and go analog. And I think you're going to see by the end of this decade that it's actually cool to go to an Orthodox or Catholic church service and say a liturgy and stand and sit, because there's something very primal and very ancient about that. And people are feeling very disconnected from those sorts of things. And so, maybe you could call this one a long shot, but I'm pretty confident about this one. I think you're going to see a big shift in society in the next 7 or 8 years.
And I'll kind of add maybe my twist on it, if I might dovetail on it, is I think the return to ritual and liturgy, what I see is that I think it's a movement that kind of starts with our generation, Perry, where it's like we don't want the same routine, the same liturgy as our parents. It's a freshening of it, so it looks different.
Correct.
And it feels
Yes.
different, and it's more personal. I think what I see in people that I know that are in their 20s and 30s, and people in their 40s and 50s, is that there's the shift. It's a more personal. It's a more even though you're doing things as a community, as a group, that there's more of a personal element to it. And instead of watching, you're participating. I think that's the shift that I'm seeing personally. Is it has more meaning than maybe what our parents were. It was ritual because you were there to watch versus the ritual where you're there to participate. And so that's the twist that I kind of see.
I agree, Bob. It's not gonna be the same as what your parents did. In fact, I think what my generation and my parents' generation did was they happy mealed all that stuff, and they packaged it in almost like McDonald's.
Yep.
You saw a huge amount of that with Protestant churches and the church growth movement in the 80s and 90s, that everything was really slick. What I'm seeing with people in their, let's say, age 15 to 30, they don't want slick. They want authentic, and they want real.
Yes.
And they there isn't any version of slick in the spiritual world that can compete with the video games or
everything they already do,
or Lady Gaga or whatever. There's not even any point. They want something completely different from all that, and it might be doing something that people were doing 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Literally what it may be.
All right. Well, that's great. That is number 4. We have 3 left, and so we are going to join you tomorrow with prediction number 3 for the decade 2020.